On tonight's episode of the Unstory, I don't want to talk about the pain of sacrifice, or should I call this the sacrifice of sacrifice. I think back to when I was traveling, and I was in Vietnam, and I was trying to figure out what in the world was causing me to bloat, right? So I was eating, I was working out, walking every day by this time, and my body, like I would wake up and feel like my face was inflamed, my body was inflamed, and I figured we're in Asia, that's the home of the good Eastern, well, not even the home, but a place where I could get some good Eastern medicine. I found a naturopath, and I went to naturopath and a holistic practitioner or a homeopathic doctor or practitioner. And I started breaking down all of these things in my past. So, right, it was homeopath. So, in order to figure out where my balance got off, my homeostasis was off, then he wanted to know my patterns, things about my life, things about my family, my role in my family, my examples, and where did I learn certain habits, or how did I get to be the way that I was. And of course, I talked about my mother, I talked about my grandmother, and these are two examples of women in my life that show up and give examples of how you sacrifice for your family and how they handle certain situations when it came to family dynamics. And it was just amazing to me that even though I didn't realize it, that they were examples or the things that they did. I'm trying to get my thoughts together, like it's the end of the day. But one of the traits that I witnessed and tried to make a part of my life was the trait of sacrifice. And so many women in so many places around the world, I definitely saw this when I traveled, sacrifice. We sacrifice our bodies, we sacrifice our time, we sacrifice our money, we sacrifice our peace for the people we love and we care for. But nobody really talks about what that looks like, the pain of it, the things that you have to give up to be present and to be there for other people. And you do it without thinking because maybe it feels like the right thing to do. And we say maybe we prayed about it or we felt led to do something. But either way, we did it. It felt like the right thing to do in that moment. And I can speak for myself. I jumped into situations because it pulled the situation or the person or the story that they told me pulled at my heartstrings without counting the cost of it. I can give an example of when my dad died and I took on my siblings. I was 27 years old, and all I knew is I was asked to step in or to step up, and I felt like, well, it's the right thing to do. And I didn't count the cost. Going into it, I felt like all I have to do is provide love, provide structure, provide Jesus, and it'll all be okay. And of course, we don't think about what that means for us, the toll that it takes on our bodies and all of that kind of stuff, and dealing with the stress. And then, of course, taking care of the needs of younger children and all that could come with that, with grieving children or people that came from traumatic backgrounds, that the trauma that is passed on to the people who stand in as caregivers. There are people that stand in as caregivers for sick loved ones. There are people that stand in for caregivers for other siblings, for nieces, for nephews, for grandchildren. And it's a work. It is a work. It is a great work. And I saw that sacrifice for my grandmother when my parents split up and we ended up living with her and she raised us, and you hear things like, I never complain. She doesn't complain. This person doesn't complain. They just do what they need to do. And you don't know when they're sick. You don't know when they're hurting. You don't know when they're wounded. But it doesn't mean that you're not wounded. It doesn't mean that you're not hurting. It doesn't mean that there's not pain. It doesn't mean that if the people that you're giving to, you feel like are not giving back to you or reciprocating, or they're supporting, or they fight you all along the way, or you don't have the financial resources, or you maxed out all of your financial resources, and what that looks like, and the weight and the stress. And so we deal with stress in many different ways. Some people eat their stress away. Some people don't eat. Some people develop different habits. They become very spiritually focused or spiritually driven. And I can say that's one of the things that I did for the longest. It was like I would give it to God. I'm going to pray about it. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to take some classes. I'm going to try to figure out how to make this work. But I did not tap into the fact that I too was hurting, that I too had trauma, that things were going on that I didn't understand. And then I was driving one day and I felt like I was upset all the time. I felt like I was defensive. I was tired. I was easily agitated. And I heard this: you have PTSD. I'm like, really? Post-traumatic stress disorder? How in the world would I have PTSD? I thought that was something that only soldiers had. But then in that moment, I was thinking, well, you know what? I have been feeling like I've been fighting a fight. Going back to, A Color Purple moment. All my life I had to fight. And I'm saying this, and that's a movie that we can relate to, but it's true. You have to fight to stay positive. You have to fight for, that's what I felt like. You had to fight to make sure that people understood that you were loving them, fight to support them, fight to say, hey, I'm here for you. Take the help that I'm giving you. And all along the way, I can say that I felt like I got this resistance. And I was in this moment, like I said, I was driving in my car and I heard that what's going on with you is that you have PTSD. And that's when I got help. That's when I started to heal. And then you fast forward to when I took the journey around the world, going back to when I was in Vietnam, and I was talking to the homeopath. And again, when I identified that my grandmother was a great example of sacrifice for me and what that looked like and how I looked up to her for so many years. And I tried to emulate that in my own life. Yes, Vicky, this is my Unstory. I tried to emulate that in my own life, and it was not working for me. I gained about 30 pounds in the course of a year. I had so much going on, and I just remember coming home from work every day, dealing with the things that I was dealing with. Like I said, for my business, I had things going on in my personal life. I even had some things going on with my car. All I could do was eat. I'm like, I just want to eat and lay down. And I remember being in the bed sometimes, and the sun was still out. The sun hadn't even set. As soon as I could get home, the only thing I could do was sleep. And now I can think back to, oh my gosh, I must have really been depressed. I was really going through some stuff. But I'd seen examples of super women who, again, they didn't complain. They didn't say anything. They didn't require anybody to help them. They just stepped up. And maybe they didn't know how to ask for help, or maybe that was the example that they saw. But again, that's why we're talking about the sacrifice of sacrifice. We're sacrificing ourselves. I had this conversation with my sister the other day. I choose me. I choose me. It doesn't matter what anybody else has to say about that at this point in my life. I am choosing me. And in choosing me, I'm choosing to live. I'm choosing to love, because there are people that are dying, whether they don't want to live anymore and they take their own lives, or they're dying because they have things like hypertension and they have things that are going on health-wise. Transparency, my mom just had a stroke on Sunday. And her sister, within 24 hours of that, had a stroke as well. And again, more examples of women in my life who sacrifice. They sacrifice for their families, their children. They sacrifice on their jobs, whether they've sacrificed their dreams, whatever they've done to try to make life work. And when we operate in this, I am a superwoman, I can do it, it's just me, I have God, you do what you have to do. These are the things that we say. This is some of the language of sacrifice. I do what I have to do. I can do it. We even quote scriptures. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. One of my scriptures was, to whom much is given, much is required. So when things got harder and I had to step it up a notch, that scripture would come to mind and I would just dig deep and do it. It didn't matter if I was happy about it, if I wanted to do it, if I was getting a reward. I did so many things because it seemed like the right thing to do, but it was not necessarily the right thing to do for me. Now I stop and I count the cost and I think about what that looks like, because I'm in a pattern of loving myself, taking care of myself, and unapologetically doing it, being who I am, showing up in the world. But it just took me going through, experiencing all of this pain. It hurt. Like I was trying to do so much. One person, 27 years old I was. Like I said, when I took this journey or this level of sacrifice to another level, 27 years, and that lasted 12 years. And I had this revelation the other day that if I hadn't gotten the counseling, if I hadn't had this revelation, the way my psyche or my mind is set up, like I'm a fighter. When I realized you don't have to fight, you don't have to do all of that, I would have still been making sacrifices that in some ways, maybe they were rooted in ego. I think sometimes because, again, being the superwoman and I got to show up this way and I have to help people and I have to, what? When you get on an airplane and you're preparing for your flight, one of the first things they tell you to do is what? In case of an emergency, you got to save yourself first. Save yourself first. If you can't if you don't make sure that you're safe, if you don't make sure that you're secure, and locked in place, grounded, how can you help anybody else? How can you help anybody else? So again, the things that we don't talk about, I'm talking about in my life. We think it's cute to sacrifice, and we think that sacrifice looks like suffering. And it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. Doesn't mean that you have to, here's the caveat, right? You don't have to thoroughly enjoy everything that you're doing and it has to make you smile, because things do stretch you in ways, but you have to be careful about that, because if they start to chip away at who you are as a person fundamentally, if your mental health is at risk, if your general health is at risk, if it's taking away from the essence of who you are, then you got to question yourself. Is this like true sacrifice in the sense of the word that it requires? Because I feel like we can do anything for a period of time, but then sometimes you just got to cut it off and know when you've given your best, and then that is enough. Because there are so many people that are hurting. There are so many people that are sick in the name of sacrifice. And we got to take better care of ourselves. You got to love yourself. You have to be in alignment with what the universe has for your life. And when you're in that place where you can hear, then you know the people and the things that you are to give yourself to. And again, coming to the place of healing when I was in Vietnam and I sat down with the homeopath and I talked all about my lineage and where I got that example of sacrifice from, though I'm so thankful for the women in my life and for like my grandmother and my mother and my aunts and the people who sacrificed so that I would have a chance to be who I am in the opportunity. I'm so thankful for that. I feel like I am the woman that I am because of some of these examples, but then also I need to see that their level of sacrifice that maybe was required didn't fit me. It didn't fit my life. It didn't fit my life. And I was trying to force myself into a model or a pattern that was not working for me at all. And I just want you to consider that. The unstory, right? Those are the things that we tell ourselves that don't benefit our lives. And if we're going to make effective change and lasting change in our lives, like we really have to figure out what's holding us back. And sometimes it's the things that we're telling ourselves, right? That I'm superwoman, that I can do it, that I just need to put my nose to the grindstone. Words like, well, you just have to grind and you have to hustle. And again, the sacrifice, is it worth it? Because a lot of times when you're raising children, as a parent, you think, oh, I'm just doing this for my child, or I'm doing this for this person, and it's not about me. And, you know, they're going to thank me later. And you do that for the reward at the end. Look, let me tell you something. That reward might not even come at the end. There might not be an end in sight, because what if you're doing something for someone, if you're doing it with that expectation and you're sacrificing with an expectation, and they don't come back and they don't say thank you. They actually resent you for the things that you did, and that wasn't enough for them, and you couldn't give enough and you couldn't do enough. We don't talk about the other side of that. We think that it's going to be all great and it's going to be just wonderful, and because people saw your sacrifice and your suffering and how you denied yourself and what that looks like and the toll that it took on you, that they're going to be like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. That's why I had to get delivered from ego. And when I got delivered from ego, like that was another thing that healed me, and it helped me and moved me to a place of wholeness. Because again, if you're doing it and you're doing it because you're aligned, and this is the thing that you know is right for you to do in the moment, you know how much to give to the point without killing yourself or creating these deficits in your life, that's fine and dandy. Then that's all the things that you might get from it. You do it for that reason. You're not doing it to get anybody's approval, to get anybody's love. You're doing it because you're aligned and you're giving from an abundant place, because your cup runneth over. And when you give from a place of the cup runneth over, then even if it's not returned to you in the way that you think, you'll be okay. You will be okay. So that would be my challenge, especially in the name of Women's History Month. Women are known, again, for their sacrifice. Sacrifice does not equal suffering. And you have to figure out what that line is for you. Love yourself. Tell yourself the truth about why you're giving. Why do you feel like you need to sacrifice? Why you're doing, how you're moving in your purpose. Tell yourself the truth. Because these lies that we believe, or these examples that we saw, that although they were great on the outside from our perspective, we don't know what the pain is for that person. We don't know what they went through to be able to sacrifice or to give and to do. And make sure that you're not trying to take somebody else's example and fit that into your life. And it doesn't work for your life. It doesn't work for the time that we live in. And it's hurting us. It's hurting us. And it's time to heal. That's my little 2 cents with the Unstory. I will download again next week with something else that I've not wanted to talk about in the name of transparency. You all have a wonderful evening. And remember, Love yourself. Choose you. Stay in alignment. Show up in the world. Put your head down. Do the work on you. Turn inward, as my friend Steph with the relationship firm says, turn inward. And then show up in the world bigger and better than before.